Hey, what's up, everyone? So today we're going to continue to look at players who are exceptional in the game of Othello, and of course today we're looking at Fumpicat, who is, in my opinion, one of the greatest Blitz players who have ever played the game. So I think in the previous episode we talked about Hideshi Taminori, who is the seven-time world champion. Today we are going to talk about Mr. Ben Seeley, who is actually the two-time world champion. He had a back-to-back titles. So I think something really, really interesting as a parallel, or to kind of contrast between these two players is that Hideshi Taminori is somebody who believes in his opening set so strongly and he plays it so consistently well. And of course, Mr. Ben Seeley is somebody who actually plays a wide variety of openings and tries many different things in the game, and he's still able to somehow make it very, very difficult for his opponents to play against. So even for me, when I play online, when I first started off playing Othello, I would go on to play okay and play against him and challenge him. And of course, like many others, I would lose terribly many games consecutively. I think I somehow recall maybe only winning one or two games out of a potential 20 or 30 games that I played straight with him. So it's that crazy and that level of consistency that Mr. Ben City has despite playing a huge variety of openings and mid game play. So obviously he definitely knows something about the game that most of us don't really know. So I think he's somebody to learn from. If we are talking about the fourth approach of ways to improve, which is learn from experts, and of course he's beyond a level of expert. He's definitely a world class player, and definitely it might be even challenging to just kind of understand his moves, even if you just flip through his games. So today what we're going to do is just flip through his World Othello Championship games during the 2 years that he won his World Othello Championship. And then we'll take a look at also his more recent online games on Othello Quest. So specifically in the 1 minute blitz games, which is the most that he usually plays in. So let's take a look at the games right now. So here we are at the World Othello Championship 2003 page, which was actually the first world title that Mr. Ben Seeley won. So we're going to look at the games. Considering that this World Othello Championship was 18 years ago, I think even Mr. Ben Seeley himself said that how the games played before might have been a little bit more forgiving as compared to the more modern World Othello Championships. That's because the software was still not as widely being used to study the game, and everybody was playing a little bit more on their own skill and intuition. So let's take a look at the standings after round 13, which is all 13 rounds of the preliminary. So Ben City was on top with 10 wins and the highest Brett Well, and of course Mr. Makoto Suikuni was also on 10 wins. So I think both of them met in the finals, and ultimately Ben City won that final with 2 games to 0. So a very, very powerful performance by Mr. Ben City. Considering that he was actually one of the relatively new players back then and a very online based player, I think a lot of people were kind of astonished by his skill. So let's take a look at the cross table perhaps just to click through some of these games. So we're going to load the cross table and let's take a look at how Mr. Ben won. So he won 5 straight games and then losing one. And then won another 3 straight games, losing one, and then won one and lost one and won the final one to get 10 wins. So let's take a quick look at this game just to kind of find out what kind of openings he played back in the day. So he's playing white over here, and he played perpendicular. So this is something interesting to note because in the modern day, Mr. Ben Seeley actually plays the diagonal opening almost all the time. So I think he's also widely known as one of the few players who successfully converted being a white perpendicular player into a white diagonal player. So I personally have tried doing that conversion, and I believe it's extremely tough. So he plays the Rose Bill, and then this variation to f6. I think I've seen Potentially Mr. Hideshi Taminori played this one as well. So it's kind of like a side variation while getting two temples to group into the center. Very interesting. So this f3 move is a bit strange because it gives up an easy e2, which seems to be counterintuitive compared to what you usually want to do. So that gives black an easy access to e2. And then, of course, on the tail end of this entire long row, he plays f1. So I would say that it might be a bit of a variation in terms of something that Mr. Ben has planned for. And again, over here, once black jumps into the pocket, white covers at e1, which is again the tail end of this continuous diagonal row. So it's really interesting. It does look a bit bad for white at first, but somehow I think in terms of tempo, he seems to be catching up. So that's one of the more interesting things about Othello as well. So right now he's kind of forced black control this mini diagonal, forced black into the X square, which is very interesting how he managed to pull it off. So this diagonal control seems quite interesting as well. Try to shut down the moves. Okay, so right now white has full control of this access to b7 and is just chasing after the access. So I think quite a convincing win by Mr. Ben City by controlling the accesses. So very beautiful game and very much his style, even based on what I've seen him play online. Now let's click through the second game just to take a look at what, maybe get an idea of what Mr. Ben Seeley plays as black. So he plays the usual f5 move. And then basically playing the Tiger to Stephenson. And Emmanuel Caspert plays Nokon against him, and he played the book sequence. I think this is a fairly book sequence, so that's nothing unusual at the moment. So even though the sequence does seem nothing unusual at the moment, but it does look like, black is playing a very solid game. And over here, I think white is asking the question in terms of setting up a poison d8 just to tempt black to go in. Let's see what he goes in. No, he doesn't. He just ignores that approach and allows white to go into c2, branches out, and then makes the clean move down. So this move to g4 is basically unpoisoning his own d8 by creating d4. So I would say that's a very clever move in terms of jumping out, forcing c2, and then he jumps in for d8. If white didn't take c2, white takes d8, black would be able to capture c2 and control this mini diagonal. So this g4 move is brilliant because it's cutting out and giving white two options, but giving himself the other option to cover back. So over here, black closes in and controls this mini diagonal. I think this is something that I observed to be very, very strong in terms of how Ben Seeley plays, in terms of controlling the edges and also the access and making use of such a control. So over here, white is forced. Black jumps in, creates a parity region to force parity. So this top left is actually a 3 square region whereby only black has access to. So essentially he's already created somewhat of a parity region for himself. Black goes in, white doesn't have access to g2, so black jumps in. So this is probably where parity might get a little messy, but black just goes for a clean diagonal control. So this is quite an advanced technique in terms of the diagonal control, just to be confident enough to play such a move. Just to be sure that white doesn't have access to h1 and no access to a8, and at the same time the only way that white can kind of interact with this g2 this is to play h3, of which black will counter with a h1 swindle, and that would be a swindle against h2 because black has control of this entire second row. So very interesting. how Ben Seeley managed to shut down that game. So I think this is a very beautiful sequence. So let's jump over to perhaps this game against Mr. Roberto Sperandio, a very famous Italian player who goes by the nickname Gatron, I believe, on Play OK, and perhaps also on Othello Quest as well. So again, white over here is Ben Seeley, and he's played the perpendicular, and he's playing the no kung opening. So this is just like the standard book sequence, nothing really special. So I think even for Ben, he seems to be playing a more safe game at the World Championship. So I would say this is fairly book. To be confident to throw out this X square at G7, you have to be sure that this is a 5 square sealed region so that you can kind of capitalize on parity. So regardless of where black plays over here, white will be able to secure parity. So white throws in, forms the edge, takes the corner, plays this move to get a continuation move over here, connects the region, goes for a simple parity win. So I think that was quite a close game, but I think still firmly in control in white. So great game by Mr. Ben Seeley over here. So let's now move over to perhaps the game against Tim Chrisvonos. So Tim Chrisvonos is somebody who is, I know as one of the top few online players as well. He's a Canadian player, very, very talented and creative. I always like to see him as almost a mini Ben Seeley of sorts in terms of how he plays, and he's only gotten better since 2003. So let's take a look at this game that was played against Ben and Tim. So I think Ben decided to go ahead with Logistello against Tim, and I think Black Logistello is always very tricky to play against. So over here, I think White played G6 is quite a standard book sequence. Okay, and that basically just skirt around the shape. So I think this is still fairly in line with general book and probably still quite balanced. So let's try to see, which move or particular sequence of moves actually contribute to quite a huge disparity in the end result. I'm quite surprised to kind of see that Ben Seeley won Tim by quite a huge margin over here. So over here, I think the tricky thing about Logistello is that it gives up quite a lot of opportunities to steal tempo. So I think if it's not handled properly, then it might be a huge disaster. So I think this move is pretty special by Ben to play h6 to cut off the entire tempo and to regroup. I think Ben is very good at playing this sort of moves because it seems like one might think of playing d7 and white would play into h6, but again over here he just cuts off the move by taking h6 and then kind of forces white out into the squares outside to be played. So I think that really put white out of position, perhaps. This is again another move that is special. It almost seems like white isn't doing too badly actually in this shape, and yet the final score looks to be quite huge in disparity. I think the diagonal control over here is key. Because black played this move to g1, which is kind of interesting because usually you probably wouldn't want to play this so early, but I guess in this case black didn't have much of a choice as well. So black played this, and of course it became quite challenging for white to kind of secure a good sequence to play out. So this line became very important of control. White took this, black controlled the diagonal, white just formed a regular shape for black, and then white was somehow put into a bad position because of how black is positioned. So that's quite interesting. And finally, white has to play the x square with black taking access to the corner without surrendering e8. So that's quite good for black either way. And again, you can see that it's almost tough for white because white has to commit to 2x squares. Black takes the corner and then basically force feeds the parity in this region because if white just gives up e1, yeah. So I think the key point over here is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 square region whereby white doesn't have access, or at least a good access to h3, and doesn't have access to e8, putting him really, really out of position, and probably that's what contributed to the final outcome in terms of the end result being such a huge disparity. So I think this was kind of, I wouldn't say that it might be pre-planned, but forming up the shape that Mr. Ben did earlier in the mid game over here provided quite a bit of a step up or a prelude, or paved the way towards the end game. So I think this is quite interesting to note. So this particular h6 move is interesting. I think before this, it didn't seem like, white was doing too badly. Interestingly, white didn't choose to play h5 over here, perhaps, but instead white decided to go for c1. If white went for h5, perhaps white could have defended this line better, potentially. Okay, so that's, I think, quite an interesting game. So let's take a quick look against, I think, Suicune. That would be an interesting game. So Ben lost against Suicune in the Swiss pairing, but he defeated him 2-0 in the final. So that's quite interesting for a quick bounce back. So Makoto Suicune played Stephenson, and Ben played the usual book to No Kung. So I think this is a very book sequence. So I'm quite surprised to actually see that Ben played quite a book sequence in his years that he won the World Championship title, and then today he plays the diagonal opening, and yeah, basically he doesn't use the same opening. So perhaps Ben potentially found something interesting in diagonal that he wanted to play, perhaps, or found it easier to trap opponents. So I think even for this, Ben was playing pretty well in terms of controlling the tempo and taking the inside. But I think Sukuni has always been known to, be able to do well and take over a parity potentially. So let's take a look. Even up to this point, it does seem like white was still fairly in control, with the exception of this region that kind of Sukuni carved out. So over here, this is a 5-disc region. So I can say that this region was already kind of pre-planned for the end game state, knowing Sukuni. So Sukuni is very talented in terms of pre-planning such a parity region. So as long as he plays out the remaining regions fairly simply and within parity, this essentially becomes a very excellent position for him to actually execute, because white would be forced only to h2 and he would take the corner and he would potentially wrap up that area. So that was essentially what happened. So I think that was more than enough for him to wrap up the game. So quite an interesting game. So I think maybe Ben chose to change to diagonal opening over the years also because how well versed people generally are in countering the perpendicular white opening, perhaps. So let's go to maybe the next game over here, the last game. So let's take a look at what Ben did. So he played the Stephenson. So I can see that the entire tournament he was pretty much playing Tiger Stephenson, and it seems like a lot of people were playing No Kung at that time. So quite interesting to note. And you can see again over here, Ben basically groups up the discs very elegantly and just keeps to the side without making too many unnecessary moves. So I think this was a fairly easy game for him to kind of wrap up. So I would say that this game is not that challenging for him because he took the advantage pretty early. So I think this should be alright. Yeah, basically quite a good clean win by Ben. So now to wrap things up, let's move back into the playoff and third day option, and then we'll take a look at Ben's semifinals game and finals game. So let's take a look. So semifinal, Ben played against Andreas. So it was a best of 3. It's interesting that he won the first one and got a draw, and then finally he lost actually 33-31, and he won the match by Bradwell. So I would say that Andreas is a very talented player for sure, and yeah, I've heard many good things about Andreas. So let's take a quick look. on this game. So Ben was playing white and he already did the diagonal opening over here. So I think he has already shown signs of exploring the diagonal opening. Andreas played the snake opening. This is quite a standard Mamushi, I guess. And I think typically you would take h5 as a book opening, but over here Ben Seeley chose to take g3 to continue to just compact the discs together. Very interesting counter and variation. So black established e1, perhaps to get e2 and to cross back into h5 in the future. That's one option. Okay, and white plays pretty much over here to give up that edge, which is a bit strange to me. But after that, he chooses to regroup. So I think that's fairly interesting. Perhaps he wanted to thicken the wall to the top first, and then basically take the edge in order to allow black to position himself this way so that white can penetrate and centralize from bottom right to top left. So yeah, interesting. So if you take a look at this particular maneuver in terms of going from to f7 and bagging an e7 response followed by an e8 combo, so this is kind of like a standard edge play combo whereby you control this mini diagonal between h3 and e6 over here. Quite a clever maneuver to kind of force his opponent out of shape. And then, of course, black was forced to play that loud move to regroup into the center. White kind of parries or cuts across and tries to play out a few moves, make black play, and then white goes there. This is also a bit surprising because this allows black to play into g2, but I think white wanted to cut back and continue this mini diagonal control. So previously he had this mini diagonal control and then he basically cuts out these two. He basically cuts out the interior discs. He cut out f4 in this move to kind of set it up. So I think it's very smart. And then followed by black's response. Finally, white takes d7 and continues to extend this control and forces black into the X square. Finally, over here, you realize it's really tough for black to keep on going. So this is a very special maneuver by Ben as well. Ben feeds off f8 to force the b8 and then goes for that diagonal control. So I think it's fairly early, but at the same time, he is confident that he's controlling this mini diagonal and this entire 7th mini row over here. So basically, black doesn't have any choice. Black has to play to b3 or, okay, in this case it's a2, giving out the corner directly. So I think maybe that's the best bet for black perhaps, or so he figured. And basically white closed out the game easily with parity. So I would say that Ben probably felt really confident about this one. He probably didn't expect the game 2 to go for a draw. So let's take a look. Andreas also played the diagonal, so this is quite a standard book sequence. Yeah, so this is kind of like the control of this mini diagonal. I think up to here it's pretty much book, not much variation. So perhaps this was the start of a variation, and of course Ben is playing something special. So it seems like this opening is good for white to kind of grab a draw. I think this was pretty special by Ben, this X square, to give up this at this point. Something creative, I guess. But I think Andreas held on strong on parity, so he was able to at least get a draw. But I think Ben came out with an interesting line. Perhaps trying to be overly creative. Let's take a look at the next game. Ben plays as white, and he chose diagonal again. And you can see that he plays the same opening together with Andreas. The interesting thing about semifinals and finals is that you often see duplicate openings if they go on to game 3. Somehow they would play the same opening, but they would choose a variation within that opening. Perhaps they know that that's their opponent's comfort zone and opening set, so they would prepare and just form a mini variation in that. So I think Ben went for a very extreme kind of access play, which is often seen in his games even in modern day. He's able to cut away all the access very cleanly. So it's really difficult to play against because you get a lot of mental pressure playing against such a style and you're afraid of getting wiped out. So over here, I would say that Andreas played quite a good game to ensure some form of overcoming of parity. So yeah, finally he did win, but it was just simply not enough to win the match. So basically, you know that even though the match points were 1.5 each for Ben and Andreas, but because Ben had such a huge win in game one, he basically won by Brightwell or discount in order to advance to the finals. Let's wrap up this session with a quick look at the final game. And Ben over here, he plays the diagonal, and interestingly, Makoto plays the bat variation over here. And then Ben has a very good grasp of this opening, I guess. It looks very strange. Some of these moves looks very unorthodox, but yet they are of course two of the best players in their time, and definitely quite interesting to see how this game plays out. You can see that over here, Black seems to be fairly established in the edges, and White seems to still be in control of tempo and also the access in general. So I think Ben has a very strong sense over here that he's probably won the game already. So interestingly, Makoto was forced to play the diagonal control instead of take A2. So I think Makoto is usually exceptionally strong in this situation. He knows that he has lost the game, but he's just going to try to defend as much as possible. Okay, the next game, the last game that Ben won as Black. Let's take a look. And so Makoto basically played perpendicular and into Kommoth, and Ben played the standard Kommoth is the best sequence. So I think Ben is one of the few who managed to figure out the best lines of Kommoth by his own, I guess. At least that's what I've been told, and it's definitely hard to play against that if somebody has already figured out the best sequence. So I think Makoto was defending really strongly here, but okay, this is an interesting choice of a sudden loud move over here. So for this game feature, by the way, you can actually click on AI to get a read of the game just based on the program. So you can see that over here Ben was already leading by 4, and he's correctly selected the best move over here. So you can see what kind of precision Ben is actually playing at. So Makoto is feeding the swindle, probably hoping for this, and he can grab the swindle, but just doesn't seem to be enough because ultimately Black gets kind of like a reverse swindle back after he's given up that slot. So I think Ben must have seen this and he felt comfortable to play it. So really, really admirable of Ben to actually win this championship. Even though they didn't really win the team championship, they were fairly close enough. So I think back then Team USA was really, really strong as well. And Team Japan didn't seem to be as dominant as they are today. So I think Japan has kind of improved leaps and bounds. So just to kind of wrap this session up, let's go over to look at his more modern games at the Othello Quest app. I think based on the earlier games that we kind of looked at um, for the World Othello Championship 2003, we can kind of largely classify Ben's profile of or set of openings to be Tiger Stephenson as Black against White's Perpendicular, and of course there are much fewer players who played the diagonal opening back in the days. But when he was faced up against diagonal during the Swiss pairing against Andreas, he played the Cow variation, which is probably one of the most common books for Black against diagonal. So that's interesting to note. And of course, he played a good mix between perpendicular and diagonal opening for White. So he's probably an all-rounder. Let's take a look at Othello Quest. And typically, if I wanted to look for Ben Seeley quickly in terms of his games, I would just go to ranking because he's always constantly in the top few rankings. So I'll just go to 1 minute game. And under the Blitz section, you can see he's the 3rd rank player. So let's click into his profile and click on his recent games. And we can run through his recent games and just get a feel of what he's doing. So if his name is on the top, I think that means he's playing Black. Let's just jump into one of these games. So over here, he's up against diagonal, so we can see that, okay, so you can see that he's playing Snake. And I think, in fact, recently he's been playing Snake more often than Cow. I think he's been trying to deviate and not play the typical opening. but he still has a very strong opening set and follow up. So he really prepares his opening and he knows his opening very very well. So I think it's always interesting to note how experts play their opening. So over here you can see that this particular move might be a bit special. It's not something that you would see experts play all the time, but it almost seems like a setup move, like black feet white, black white, and then finally approaching the edge. So it almost seems like a very standard edge maneuver. So I think this one is special in a sense that he's identified that he can firmly control the diagonal control. So he jumps for an early X square. So I think in the past he hasn't really been playing that many early X squares, perhaps as compared to now, and he's able to identify such early diagonal controls extremely well. And it's really, really hard to play against such a style because the moment you slip up or you make a slight mistake, and the game is all over for you. So this is a very, very extreme kind of diagonal control set play you can see over here. So yeah, basically he won by time over here, but even on the board, the game is over for his opponent. So that's interesting to note. Let's take a look at maybe one of his games against a stronger player as white. Let's see. So he plays the diagonal opening these days. I almost never see him play perpendicular opening ever since maybe 2003 or 4. So let's see. So this is Heath Bad by 6 Hop, and basically he's played the standard book counter against it. So I would say that this is fairly book. Maybe this is a variation. I don't really recognize this one, but it's fairly easy for black to just jump into. So I can say that Ben is very, very good at edge play and very good at boundary plays as well and controlling tempo. So, for example, this particular setup over here to the right, he wanted that edge, and then after that over here, this is totally unexpected for him to play just such a huge block move. Usually players avoid playing such huge block moves and such a loud move. So black didn't feel comfortable enough to jump into the X square to kind of try to form the wedge. So he just jumped in over here and gave up the edge. So I think, yeah, given that white jumps in and removes this excess, that potentially threatens the wedge. If black were to say immediately counter over here, white will probably go in as well just to grab the corner excess and at the same time remove this excess. So even if black went in, white can go 2 moves consecutively. So that's interesting to note, that shape that Ben is able to kind of carve out for himself. So over here you can see how the edge has been set up in a way that it seems like it's tough for black to do anything about it, basically. So I would say that this game really shows Ben's strength. So he just goes ahead to play the corner, allow the wedge, jumps in, feeds, and he even feels comfortable enough to just give up this excess. So that's quite interesting to note. Okay, and of course he won by time here. Let's take a quick look at maybe his game against Silo. Silo is another World Championship 2017 semi-finalist. So let's take a quick look. He played black and he plays the Stephenson against the Nokong. And yeah, I think this one hasn't really changed much. He has abundance of knowledge. I think this is quite expected of him. And of course, Silo is also a very strong player from Hong Kong. He plays it very well. Let's see. So Ben is very, very good at making such sudden controls or line controls. So that's interesting to note. And over here, instead of deciding or playing to that region, over here he decides to defend this open region here first. So that is something important. I think he wanted to kind of regroup or play consecutively over there. So, of course, it's proved very, very effective. He almost closed off all the tempos immediately. So I think Ben is really, really good with such tempo control. And of course, he wins the game fairly easily over here. let's take a look of another game. Maybe Ben against Akabana. I think Akabana relatively new nick, but he plays very well as well. So let's take a look. He plays diagonal Heath. Okay, he's basically playing the book Heath sequence over here. So he favors going into the center over here as opposed to playing this one. Probably because after black plays either one of e8 and f8, he gets to go into f7. So he's probably waiting for that one. Okay. So you can see Ben's moves are always very clean, and it almost always seems fairly on time. He only plays it when the timing is right. He doesn't play it. He doesn't rush his moves entirely. So the moment over here when he has this diagonal control and black approaches the corner, he can then feed this and poison that corner approach, and basically black doesn't have much of a choice over here. So I think I would describe Ben's game as something that's very, very smooth. And over here, if um, Akabana had time, he would be forced to play this. Then Ben would play multiple swindles. One, two, three. One, because he doesn't have access here. Two, because this have been removed and become black, and white still has control of this entire mini diagonal, so he'll be able to take 3 consecutive moves and sweep the game. So I think somehow it works out really well for Ben, and his moves always seems to make it flow that way. So that's something very, very interesting about Ben, is that the moves almost doesn't seem to make sense, but yet he still finds a way to make it work. So I think it's very interesting there. Let's take a look and see whether we can find any other games. So maybe let's take a quick look at one of the games that he lost. But he lost by time, I guess. If he played this move, he would have won. So he lost on the last move. So again, black, he's playing Tiger Stephenson against the Nokong. So I think he knows this very well. No doubt about it. Since 2003, he's been playing Tiger Stephenson. So he's a very, very strong player in that. So this X square is quite interesting because he feels confident enough to play it, and it's almost like a early diagonal control as well. And then of course white jumps in, feeds the corner. He feels comfortable to take the corner. So you have to be really comfortable and confident of this access control in order to play that move. So I would say that Ben had it figured out as he played this. So over here, probably white should have played this just to ensure parity of swords. Let's just take a look. And then over here, black probably have to take this, white, black, white. And still, it's not enough for white to actually win the game. So very interesting, and Ben always has a strong preparation. So let's move on from looking at his games into interviewing him directly. So I think I'm quite thankful that he's happily obliged to take up the interview, and we're going to hear from the man himself. So let's move on to the interview right now. So first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Ben Seeley, for accepting my invitation to join this interview for part of the Othello Academy season 3. So as part of the last 3 episodes, I'm actually looking at Mr. Hideshi Taminori's game, your game style, and also Mr. Takanashi Yusuke. So I thought that, analyzing 3 of the very top players from Japan and also outside of Japan would, help in terms of sharing some insights to my audience. So thank you very much for accepting my invitation, and let's kind of kickstart our interview. And I think it'll be fun asking some of these questions. So maybe to start off, when and how did you first start learning Othello?
Thank you very much, Mr. Alex. It was nice of you to invite me. Um, I first learned Othello in 1995. My mother's boyfriend gave me a board as a gift. And then in the first game we played, he wiped me out because he didn't teach me any of the strategy. So I
Okay.
just, I just did the usual, beginner strategy of trying to maximize this on each turn.
Mm-hmm.
and quickly gave him a corner, and then it was, lights out after that. Um, and then I got to play a few games, really only a few games on the board. But then we were vacationing in Hawaii at his parents' house, and the computer had a Reversi program. Since Othello is so easy to program, I mean, it was called Reversi, it was really Othello. Um, since Othello programs are so easy to make, I think it was a lot of people got exposed to Othello, like during the 90s, maybe even in the 80s, just because it was so easy to make that game. And then, they would just add that to, PCs and Apple and all that. And people would get exposed that way. So it wasn't a very strong program, but I got to, play like a couple of hundred games against it and get a sense of the strategy of some basic strategy.
Yeah.
Um, and I did actually get to play a very few games online in 1995. I don't remember the name of the game site. I remember the first person I played was in Australia, and that was very exciting to me to be playing someone, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was fun. And but that was it. I mean, so it was a couple of hundred games against a week program, and a few on the board, and then a few online, and then I didn't play any at all until 2000. And then in 2000, I discovered Othello on Yahoo.
Okay. Okay.
And started playing quite a lot on Yahoo, and that was very fun, very stimulating.
Okay,
Um,
okay, interesting. I think I also first started playing Othello on Yahoo, and I remember they used to call the room, I think, was it Hamster Pit or something?
yes, yeah, that
Yeah,
was the main one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. And maybe just kind of like a follow-up question to that is like, considering you're a two-time world Othello champion, when did you realize you could potentially be really good at the game?
Um, the Actually, the first few months I was playing, I wasn't very good, and I wasn't really latching on to any particularly good strategy of how to play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then I started to get some ideas, and I started to practice those ideas and to be disciplined about that. Um, and then in the summer of 2000, after I'd been playing for about a little over 6 months, I played in the U.S. Open.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually just like went up there just to watch, and then they persuaded me to play. Um, and then I think the first game I ever played against Tetsuya Mine, who I think had been in the finals of the World Championship or the semifinals,
Okay.
actually won that game. He just
Wow.
didn't play very well, and I happened to win.
Okay.
Um, so then everybody in the tournament was shocked because I think that was like my second game or something of the tournament. So, but and then I, beat Raphael Schreiber once on the board. It was actually lost on time, but it was still cool to technically have a winning position on the board.
Okay.
Um, and Raphael was a very serious player, very dedicated, very impressive. That was good. I think the really fun standout moment for me was in 2001 when I'd been playing for about 18 months. Um, uh, I was at the U.S. National Championships and I had lunch with Brian Rose, and he was talking about how like when he first started playing, you could actually win a national championship after only playing for a year and a half. And I'd only been playing for a year and a half, and then I won that national championship, so I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't play that well at the 2001 World Othello Championship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Made a lot of weird mistakes. A little too excited, not enough sleep, partly because I was so excited.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and that was first world championship. Um, and Yeah, but I just kept improving, and I could see that I was starting to beat everybody online, more than 50% of the time.
Yeah.
Um, and that was what had me convinced that I could win a world championship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I guess, would you say that it's kind of like when you won the US national championships and then kind of like progressively you felt like hey, I could be really good at this game or something.
Well, I felt it before that.
Okay, okay.
I mean, to be honest, one of the things I've seen is that um, a lot of a lot of people value humility, and humility is very important. But I
Hmm.
also think that being confident and even actually arrogant can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I just never, I don't think I have yet seen a top player who wasn't clearly very confident, even often overconfident. Um, and I
Okay.
do mean like literally overconfident. But the thing is that
Yeah.
it's like if you have that ridiculous overconfidence, then you just keep trying, like you keep failing, but you're like, oh, I'm going to win the next game. And that was something I noticed about myself very early on. That for some reason, even if I was losing more than half the games, I would still keep feeling like, oh, I lost that one, but now I'm going to win this one. And
Oh,
so,
okay.
and so I would just,
Okay.
oh,
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very interesting point. I think,
yeah,
some of the players that I know, including myself, when we kind of have like a shocking loss, we tend to get a bit dejected and we tend to probably maybe
right,
become overly pessimistic about the next game, and we might potentially
yeah,
spiral into kind of like an uncontrollable consecutive losses as a result of that. But yeah, I think that's a
yeah,
in fact an interesting mindset, and I think I've also observed that in Mr. Sukuni back when I observed him up front
mhm,
in Singapore. He has, I think, overconfidence and confidence is also very in line with potentially, like, self-belief, I guess. And if you have that kind of,
yeah.
yeah, self-belief, you would easily bounce back, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the really funny thing for me too was that I was completely aware that it was irrational, that it was, that I really should be expecting to only win a certain percentage of the time, right? But
Yeah.
but I could also recognize that even though it was irrational in the short term, it was actually rational in the long term because it was encouraging me to do the kinds of behaviors that would lead to me improving. Um, and so like the overconfidence would help because I'd be fine with just trying some terrible opening and then trying to come back from that, for example,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, where that was kind of a good habit to have. Um,
Okay. Yeah. I think we're
wasn't
kind, yeah.
I wasn't crazy. I wasn't 100% irrational. I was partially irrational, and then the other
Mhm.
part of me was rational, and observing the irrational side and saying, but it's helping me, so I'm just going to kind of be crazy in this one way. It's just helpful.
Okay.
And I just saw it over and over again that I would see players that I thought were talented, but they seemed to not have very much confidence, and I never saw them do much. Like I really didn't see the evidence that humility was that amazing.
Yeah.
Past a certain point, like like we needed enough humility to actually learn and to be like, oh yeah, I messed up,
Yeah.
but it was like clearly you needed both. Um, there's the kind of like I'd be arrogant, so I'd make mistakes, and then I'd be humble enough to learn from the mistakes, and then I just return to the arrogance, make more mistakes.
Okay. Okay.
It's like, and you can see this habit with like small children,
Yeah.
um, where I look at them sometimes and the way they behave, and it's like, how on earth are you this arrogant? Like, how are you this, so confident when you have so little life experience and
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
making clumsy mistakes all the time? But it
Yeah.
seems to be like a good habit for long-term growth. Uh,
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I think we're kind of crossing over to the third question. So, if you don't mind, I would, kind of just say it. How, I know you kind of shared a little bit on confidence, so besides that, how did you kind of improve your skills over the years? Was it taught by people or mostly self-taught? Like,
um, well, it's a mix. There's a lot of different things. I think trying to learn in a variety of ways is a good thing.
mhm.
There were some nice articles that were online at the time, like from
Yeah.
Graham. Well, I remember some nice articles from him, and I think Michael Handel.
Hmm.
Um, and Brian Rose's book hadn't come out yet. That would have been immensely helpful. Brian Rose's free ebook, that would
Yeah.
have been very helpful. um, uh, I used Thor a lot, and the actual Thor program, including the database, but I would go through and I don't think it had an engine. So it was just manual replay,
Okay.
which was actually sort of helpful for me because um, so I'd go through the games that were played by the best players, human players, and I would really try to play out all of the other lines they could have played, and I would try to understand, okay, why did they pick the moves that they picked? Um, and so I probably picked up a little bit of the mistakes that they made too, but it was that was a very good exercise to try to get inside their heads, to figure out why would they have played that particular move.
Okay.
Um, and I do think that was helpful. Like when I played Makoto Suekuni in
Yeah.
2003 and 2004, I had studied, I think virtually every game that he'd ever played, every tournament game he'd ever played. Um, Certainly every single game he had won. I kind of had that as a policy that if he lost a game,
Okay.
unless it's a really strong opponent, I was like, okay, well, he probably made a bunch of dumb mistakes in this game, so I'm not going to study that.
Yeah.
Um, but this was even before I knew he would be a possible opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with Makoto Suekuni, like people like Tim Sherwanos from Canada and other players, they would rave about him and say that they thought that he was the best player in the world at the time.
Okay.
So that was part of why I was made a point of studying his games. And he also had maybe more creativity than any other
Yeah.
top player, so that was fun. Um, so I'd already studied every single one of his wins. I think sometimes more than once,
Mm-hmm.
before I'd ever played him. So I think, and because I was just trying to understand his moves, even including moves that were mistakes, I think I was more inside of his head than if I had studied his games using an engine, where I would have maybe just ignored the moves which were a mistake,
Yeah.
technically speaking. So I think that probably did help me with anticipating what he might do during during our games. I mean, I definitely felt like I was able to anticipate most of his moves,
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
which is something most players could not have um, achieved with Makoto, because he was a very creative player. So it's generally
Yeah.
hard to, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, I would agree there because I think using a software or engine to kind of analyze whether a move was optimal may not really be optimal against humans. Sometimes, even if you play a less positive move, it could actually play a lot on your opponent's mind, given the style that he thinks or the way he plays. It could actually
Yeah.
lead to even a greater, mistake by your opponent if you played the right, less negative move, perhaps. I mean, less positive move. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, very
yeah,
much so.
yeah,
And I had a sense of like all of the different types of tricks that Makoto might try to pull out from out of his sleeve. I think he
yeah,
has some sort of a like his nickname in Japan is the magician or something like that,
yeah.
Um, so a lot of my approach was to just be super careful about avoiding any possible weird trick. And he
Okay,
still, beat me a couple of times in those 2 years, um, where it was with some very cool trick. But I just didn't manage to avoid it.
okay, okay.
And there was also, I mean, it's kind of funny the things that'll make a difference. Like part of why I used the Thor program was just that it was aesthetically very pleasing, as I recall. It was very beautiful in a way. I mean, for the technology of the time, it was very beautiful.
Yeah,
Um, and But I would try all sorts of things. I was very experimental, and like at one point, I think for some reason I got it in my head to play out every single possible opening 7 move sequence or something. Yeah, so I did learn from articles, I did learn from computer programs, I did learn from playing out the top human um, games and trying to get inside their heads and why they picked the moves that they picked.
yep.
Um, but but where I actually learned the most, I think, and got the most benefit was from trying to teach other people. Um, and I was so enthusiastic about the game in the first few years that I would sometimes basically, bug people into letting me teach them stuff,
Okay.
and by teaching people and trying to explain things in different ways
Yep.
and that thing, and that was very, that was very helpful for me in understanding the game better and trying to get very precise about exactly what it was that was important and what wasn't important.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's just that, like Richard Feynman um, will talk about how, if you can't teach something, then you don't actually understand it. So by teaching it to a lot of
Yep.
different people all over the world, I did understand the game better.
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed. Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
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 yeah, I think that's widely recognized. If you can teach it, you probably understand it the most. Yeah, so I think
yeah.
even for me, if I started this YouTube channel, I think it's also helping me a little bit more in terms of kind of reinforcing some of these concepts.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I can tell that you've benefited from making all these teaching videos and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, thank you for that response. So I think yeah, it's interesting. So I think even for me, I'll probably start looking at some of the past world champion games, maybe even off the engine. So it's probably more conceptually enriching, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
So maybe let's kind of move on to the fourth question, which is, what do you think is your greatest achievement in Othello so far?
Well, the World Championships, winning them was great. From what I can tell from analyzing the games, actually my best tournament was the 2014 World Championship.
Okay.
And Makoto Swekany just happened to be amazing that year, so he won. And part of the problem was that I had such a fun trip. I just kept not getting very much sleep, and so by the end of the World Championship, I was very tired. I think I wish I had gotten more sleep before the tournament, but oh well. So I had a lot of great games earlier in the tournament, um, and it was very solid. It was very fun. I think winning I think it's called the Shinagawa Seaside All Stars tournament in
Yeah.
2005 in Japan. That was very exciting. Partly because I had to come from behind and win every single game in order to win that tournament. Where I lost, I think, two of the first three games, and then I had to win five in a row after that, including two in a row against Tamanori. So that was, and this was against. So I had to win against um, Tetsuya Nakajima and
Yeah.
um, Hiroshi Goto and Makoto Suekami and Kazuhiro Sakaguchi, and it's like it was all all these top Japanese players, and that was
Was that actually the special All Stars tournament that you guys had, or?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah. So that was just, I think, seven or eight of us, um, and all of us were world champions or had, I think, but at least been in the world championship
Yeah,
semifinals.
yeah.
Um, so that was tough, and that was the day after the Meijin tournament. So that was very intense as well.
Okay.
Um, anyway, so it was nice to actually win a tournament in Japan because I did okay in the first two tournaments I played there, but I was not at my element, not at my peak strength for sure.
Okay. And
Um,
and were you like officially conferred a Japanese, Dan certification, or?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think they did give me something, just I think somewhat on an honorary basis,
Yeah.
just for being the world champion.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what it is technically.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's at least five down. I remember that,
Yeah.
but but I'm sure it's technically below a bunch of other guys there. Well, it's a very nice system that they have, and that they recognize that, and they give you a really nice um, scroll, basically,
Yeah.
which has your achievement on it, and that's very nice. That's fun. It's beautiful, and it's a nice ceremony. I like that how they do that. They do a lot of things very well in Japan, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, they've you know more countries should probably be trying to copy what they do there. Um, and then for whatever reason they don't, which is silly. But
Yeah.
we should all be trying to learn more from each other.
Yep, for
Um,
sure.
yeah,
Okay, okay, got you. So yeah, I guess yeah, your greatest achievements would then kind of be winning the world championships and also winning that special All Stars tournament in Japan, right? I guess. I think yeah,
Yeah,
that's quite an achievement. It's almost like a masters tournament in Japan, and back then, everyone who participated in that one was like a world champion or similar in
yeah.
level. So, maybe
It
kind
did.
of connecting that to the World Othello Championship, I was hoping to, kind of ask you also, you kind of won the World Othello Championship in 2003 and 2004. You beat Sukuni Makoto from Japan, in the finals in back-to-back years.
Mhm.
Thereafter, you have attended quite a few World Othello Championship seeking a third world title, right? So you came closest in 2014, which you earlier highlighted that, you played your best and you met Sukuni Makoto again in the final. Kind of how hard was it to play against Makoto in a world championship final for the third time? And, how hard was it losing that final, given that you played, perhaps one of your best Othello?
Well, I didn't play that well in the finals though, so it wasn't like I felt badly about losing the finals. Makoto played better in the final for sure. Um, and he also had only he lost the first game, but that was I think it was the first, yeah, and but that was just basically due to time trouble. Um, and like so essentially he probably should have won all four games that we played in that tournament.
Yeah.
Um, I did want to go back and revise my earlier answer about my greatest achievement. I mean, I would actually say that my biggest achievement is just playing so well in the Blitz games online, um, especially in XOT, where I think I have a better record than any other player who's played in a tournament. Um, and that's where I've clearly achieved the most for the longest period of time. Where I have the most consistent record, um, and
Okay.
entertained the most people.
Yeah.
Probably done a lot of really fun, crazy things. Just playing
Okay.
so many tens
Yeah.
of thousands of games. I mean, so people tend to emphasize the tournaments, but I almost never get to play in a tournament, and I don't tend to. So I don't really get to practice that very much. I also don't have much incentive to practice that very much.
Yeah.
There aren't prizes in the USA the way that there are in Japan. Nor is there very much public recognition, that kind of thing. Like I don't end up on like I've been on national TV in Japan, but I've never been on national TV in the USA, even though
Okay.
I'm an American, right?
Yeah.
So so in the area where I actually have competed and where other people have competed with me, and it's been a more equal fighting ground. That's where I've actually done better.
Yeah.
The tournaments are relatively weaker for me. Another part of it is just that I tend to play at 100% or close to 100% effort most of the time online. So I don't really have that much room to improve when I'm playing in a tournament. But I definitely think there are a lot of people who, when they're playing online, it's more just goofing around and having fun, which is totally appropriate. They can do that too. But then they get into the tournaments and then they're more serious and they have that extra gear. Um, where I don't seem to have as much of that since I'm already playing about as well as I know how to play in the online games, since that's just sort of my attitude. Um,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So kind of like yeah, I mean, I would say that, yeah, your greatest achievements, even for me, I've benefited from them, given that you always have a very strong online presence, and I know many players like to follow your games. There's always a crowd coming to watch your games and kind of learn from your style. So I think that's yeah. I think that's arguably your greatest achievement over the years, besides your world titles and of course the All Stars tournament. So yeah, even for me, I would hope that in the future that Othello would get a greater recognition, be it in Japan or outside Japan for sure. So maybe given that I think Japan has quite a huge media coverage also because of their tradition, right? So and we all know that Japan has always been the top country to beat in any World Othello Championship. So kind of linked to that, how would you? I mean, if I were to ask you to name three of your toughest rivals from Japan, who would they be and why?
Hideshi Tamanori and Yusuke Takanashi for sure. And certainly Makoto Suekuni when he's on form. Which sometimes he's having more fun in life rather than training for Othello, but when
Yeah.
he trains, he's very, very good.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, I've got to say, Masaya Kasai,
Yeah.
Guru, you know, where he's really not that interested in tournaments, but he has a really a great record in tournaments. And online, we're great rivals, and we have a lot of really nice conversations. He's a really great guy.
Yeah.
Um, so I really enjoy chatting with him. It seems like really, pretty much everybody seems to really like him. He's never creating drama, never
Yeah.
um, not giving people an unpleasant time.
Yep.
Um, Very relaxed guy. He
Yeah.
told me that he likes to that he when he was around 22 he decided that he was going to relax in life. So he
Okay. Okay.
very deliberately avoids creating unnecessary stress for himself or others. And it seems to work well for him. So I applaud him for taking an unusual approach to life and doing well with it. It seems. Um,
Okay. That's
I wish I
interesting.
had done more of that when I was younger, for sure.
Did he
I'm more
did he kind
relaxed
of
now.
mean that he wants to retire at the age of 22, or you just take it easy and
I think just taking it easy in
Okay.
life. I mean, I mean, the thing is, like, obviously, he spent a lot of time as the number one rated Othello player on the World Othello Federation rating list.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, he could achieve a tremendous amount while also being relaxed. I think it just means that he just doesn't stress himself out. He doesn't make himself miserable. He doesn't make himself do lots of things he doesn't want to do.
Hmm.
Um, so uh, so I don't think it's so much about retirement, although I wouldn't be surprised if he would be able to retire early. It's just more about him, figuring out how to have a good life without stressing himself out, and how to be
Okay.
good at a fellow and other things, um, and also without stressing out other people. So I've tried to learn from him on that front, on the life front, and I've also tried
Okay.
to learn from him in Othello.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
so
that's
yeah,
very interesting to note. Yeah. So okay, yeah. I mean, that's interesting. So just a quick recap was you listed Hideshi Taminori, Takanashi Yusuke, they are 7 and 5 time world champion, and of course, Sukuni Makoto, probably one of your your greatest rival and the person you met in the world championship finals the most. So I'm sure you know his game, and of course, yeah, Masaya Kasai is somebody who it's kind of like a I would say like a wild card in the Othello world. So I think he's a very special player, and even in my interview with Mr. Takanashi Yusuke, I've also asked him about him as well. So maybe moving on, considering that you're a you're one of the non-Japanese top players in the world, perhaps kind of considering players who are outside of Japan, who would you say are three of your toughest rivals outside of Japan, and why?
well, Pianat Anchuli from Thailand for sure.
Yeah.
And in Japan, he has the reputation of perhaps having the strongest opening book in the world, which I could believe. So that's um, a great advantage that he has. And then he has a fantastic end game in particular, and obviously a solid mid game. Um, and I think I've lost all my games against him in tournaments. My online record against him is much better, but in tournaments, I think I've lost all three games. Um,
Oh, okay.
and which is kind of sad because I could have won one or two, but I would have had to play really well.
Yeah.
Um, and Yeah, he's another more relaxed guy, which is cool. Similar body type, also to Masaya Kasai, more of a lean, skinny guy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, and one thing I have noticed, I don't know why this would be the case, but it does seem like nearly every world champion has been more on the lean side. Um, so like, I have not won a world Othello championship when I've been, you know, older.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Uh,
yes, Song Yan from China was telling me that he does run a bit before the World Othello Championships just to prepare himself physically. So I think who knows,
yeah,
maybe better body health or physical helps you in terms of blood circulation or of sorts, or helps how your mind works, I guess.
yeah. I think aerobic fitness is good.
Yeah,
Helps to deliver more oxygen to the brain.
yeah,
I think even having stronger muscles is useful, or more muscle mass is actually kind of useful. Um, I've noticed benefits from hiking, but lately I've been doing more like calisthenics. And
hmm,
my experience, I think it's maybe because the muscles can store glycogen, which is basically sugar.
hmm,
Um, and then, so I think there might be an advantage to um, the muscles just being able to store extra sugar on hand that the brain can use later when it needs it.
right,
Also, muscles are made out of proteins, and the neurotransmitters in the brain are converted from proteins. So you've got like tyrosine is converted ultimately into dopamine, and tryptophan is converted into serotonin,
yeah,
um, and that kind of thing. So maybe somehow muscles having more muscle can be useful um, for neurotransmitter balance or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but it does seem like different physical exercises can have different mental benefits. And I think even stuff like just stretching, yoga
yeah,
is somehow useful for creativity. Perhaps that's been my experience. Is that when I stretch more, it seems like I have a little more flexibility in my thinking as well, and that's nice.
okay,
Not that I'm like an amazing physical health or anything. I just observe, what things that seem to benefit me and things that seem to hurt my performance and that sort of thing. Which
okay,
is a very useful thing about Othello or any other game that you can play where you have like a rating, like a chess rating or a Go rating, um, is that you can use it to test, uh, you know, where you can see, okay, if I eat these foods, what's the effect on my rating? If I do this with my sleep, what's the effect on my rating? You know,
yeah,
if I do the exercise. So, so I've actually learned a lot about stuff that can benefit my mind and also to a certain extent my physical health just from all these physical experiments, which I then just observe the effect on my rating. Or if I take this supplement, what is the effect on my rating? Um, and that's a very useful and semi-objective metric to evaluate different types of experiments. Um, and it's not a perfect measurement because it's possible to improve at Othello while getting worse at some other things.
yep,
But by and large, most of the time, if something improves my Othello game, it also improves my language fluency. It improves, my creativity and accuracy of all manner of thinking. And generally speaking, especially long term, it's not possible to play, great Othello day in and day out
yep,
unless I'm more physically healthy.
for sure,
Uh,
yeah, and
that's just something I would recommend to people. If you're going to be paying any attention at all to your rating, just observe what happens, depending upon your sleep changes, your dietary changes, and just use the rating as a way of measuring the effect that different things are having on your physical health and mental health and that sort of thing. You might as well get that value out of it. Yeah.
okay, okay,
And in general, most people should be conducting far more experiments than they are. If you try enough things, eventually some things will really click and have a somewhat magical effect for people. But you have to try enough things to figure out what those things are. And it means trying a lot of duds along the way, but eventually you strike gold and you say eureka, and you found something that works well for you.
yep,
Um,
agreed.
and that is certainly a big part of why. I mean, I put in way less work into Othello than I've ever done in the past.
Hmm.
And of course, I'm older than I was, as we all are. Um,
Yep.
but I've tried enough things, learned enough things that I have an easier time being indecent physical and cognitive health. So that's sort of what I'm coasting off of. Instead of working really hard with a more mediocre diet, it's just like a better diet and less work is actually a better result. So yeah.
Yep, for sure. So kind of like I mean, I would definitely agree there, and I think for me, I'm also considering that aspect. But if you don't mind, if we could kind of come back to the question that given that you've named Pianet Anjuli as one of your toughest rivals outside of Japan, who would you say are the other two?
Oh yeah, and then Mike Barassi from Italy
Okay.
as well. Very good and resourceful tournament player.
Yeah.
Of course, he won a world championship.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think Song Yan from China as well. I mean, I've had a little better luck with him, I think, but that's like I said, that's luck. So I need to watch out for him in the future. I think. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
I think there was a world championship where he wasn't able to attend because of some weird visa issue or something, and I thought
Yes.
that was really tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that was in 2018, perhaps. I think the one that Keisuke won, I guess. I think I was quite looking forward to him playing, Keisuke if he had went. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, he has a really great style. So I really enjoy his style of play,
Yeah.
in particular. And so he's had some really great games on EFLO.com, which is a turn-based game site.
Yeah.
Um, so I think maybe due to putting lots of thought into the games or whatever, but he's had some really great games there. Um,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So maybe now let's kind of switch to a lighter note away from Othello. Just wanted to kind of understand, what is your favorite food in the United States and outside of the United States, considering that you've traveled quite a bit for Othello as well.
oh yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, the foods outside the USA are more interesting to me. I didn't get to eat as much of them as I would have liked. Um, I like to often make a green drink for myself where it's just a blend of like spirulina and alfalfa and other greens like that, and then put in some fruit
Mm-hmm.
like mango or frozen pineapple, frozen blueberries.
Okay.
And I'll often add in some nuts like cashews or almonds. Um,
So that's kind of like a
and
juice or puree or
yeah, it's blended up, so it's
okay.
almost yeah. Um, and then adding in maybe avocado, sometimes honey, and that is I think very healthy and it's very tasty and very
Mm.
easy. Um, and that's a very Los Angeles sort of of a food. So I'm representing Los Angeles here. Uh,
Okay.
unfortunately, I think I don't know, a lot of the classical American foods I think are not especially healthy. They're not terrible either. Um, but I wish there was a little bit more of a health emphasis as far as mainstream American.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of very healthy, more niche American. It's a niche. It's a where you can find it in people who are more health conscious. There are some people in the USA who are extremely health conscious, but I live near a lot of them.
Yeah.
But so
So
anyway,
what yeah, I mean,
yeah.
how about, I mean, I guess that's quite a that's quite a special diet compared to the mainstream Americans for sure. But how about like, is there any favorite food that you have outside of the United States that you've tried, perhaps?
Well, well, I first tried it in the USA, but sushi is certainly one of my favorite
Okay.
foods, and that is one great discovery I made recently, which is that just simply taking frozen fish, as long as it's been frozen long enough, which is like 3 to 7 days, depending upon the nation's health code. But you can just thaw the fish and just eat it raw. So I've been getting uh, frozen wild caught salmon from Trader Joe's and their wild ahi tuna and just thawing it and eating it. I love that.
Okay.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's like about as lazy as it gets while also being incredible. Um,
Yeah, but at the
all the
same time, I guess it's very healthy, considering there's very minimal oil and any unwanted substances, perhaps. Yeah, that's very healthy.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so simple. I mean, there's in general, the more ingredients there are in something, the more of a risk you're taking. The more of a
Mhm.
risk that there's something in there that's going to cause some mild allergic reaction, or it's some weird preservative, or it's a weird artificial flavoring, which is covering up the underlying awfulness of the so-called food itself.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing in general is that when it comes to foods, I eat a lot of strange herbs and stuff. Not just like Chinese herbs, but mostly a lot of American and European herbs. Um, and my experience is that that significantly increases my creativity, and so I play noticeably better with all those more wild, unusual plants. Um, and I think just in general, this is a very generalized theory that I have. The theory is that having a greater variety of unusual but healthy chemical compounds in your body and in your brain and so on makes it possible to be more creative and to store a greater variety of information and knowledge and ideas. Um, so that has been my experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agree. So, you know, maybe let's, I think something that is related. I guess you've already mentioned that you like hiking and you are also quite big on, health eating. So, what do you kind of enjoy doing besides Othello? Like, besides Othello, what's your other pastime?
Well, definitely hiking. I live right
Okay.
next to the mountains.
Yeah.
I do a lot of hiking. Um, so within 5 minutes, I've got a great view of all of Los Angeles. Um, Although I wish the air quality were better, because
Hmm.
air quality is another one of those very proven things that has a big effect on people's intelligence and how likely it is that they'll get dementia when they're older and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I wish the air quality were better here.
Okay.
Uh, but
And
and so like and in February I did a 75-mile backpacking trip with a friend out in the desert. That was quite intense.
hmm
Basically quite fun.
yeah.
Um, the desert is intense. That's what that's the main thing I learned.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Um,
And then I read a lot. Yeah,
okay.
I spend time with friends. Of course, that's what everybody should be doing.
Yeah,
I should be spending a decent amount of time with friends.
for sure.
Um, yeah, I like to sunbathe. I live in Southern California. It's a nice perk. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, maybe kind of coming back to Othello, since we kind of sidetrack away from Othello. If I were to ask you to just guess which year do you think WOC will happen again?
Next year, 2022. I
Oh,
hope.
okay. Okay. That's quite confident given the situation for COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point, people. I mean, I think it's going to be multifaceted. Of course, more and more people are going to be vaccinated, which is going to slow the spread of the disease. More and more people will have had the disease.
Hmm.
Presumably, more of the people who are really vulnerable to it will have, they will have experienced the disease, and um, so that will be more resolved. And then on the other side of things, I think more and more people are just going to want to return to normalcy.
Yep,
Um,
agreed.
and just you know accept a certain degree of risk. I
Yeah,
mean, our modern lives are amazingly risk-free compared to the lives our ancestors had. So,
yep.
um, especially when you think of infectious diseases
Hmm.
and how much risk there used to be. So this is sort of because it's a respiratory illness. My impression is that it's harder to get like a really flawless vaccine for it, and that kind of thing. So there's um, it's a little bit harder to fully protect against respiratory diseases
Yeah,
as compared to
agree.
some other
Yeah.
diseases.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think hopefully, we can see WOC being hosted again soon because the last we want is kind of like a gap of too many years, I guess. Kind of like a last bonus question here, that I wanted to ask is that given that Sukuni Makoto won the world title in 1997 and took another 17 years before he captured another in 2014. So, interestingly, I also note that it's also been about 17 years since you last won your 2004 world title. Do you think you might have it in you to win at least one more world title, assuming that, the world championship, as you said, kickstarts again soon, like in 2022?
Yeah, if I attended enough times, I think the
Yeah.
odds that I could win again.
Yep.
Um, and I seem to keep learning about the game and improving, and um, I don't yet seem to be getting significant age-related declines, so that's
Mhm.
nice. Um, I mean, Hideshi Tamanori
Yeah.
shows that it's possible to stay in world-class shape, into your 50s.
Yep.
I think in the chess world, Viswanathan Anand
Hmm.
um, was very, very good for a very long time.
Yep.
Um, so that's helpful. Of course, it depends on the competition even more than it might depend on me. So if Akihiro Takahashi or something reaches an even greater level or something like that, then maybe it would be out of reach. I don't know.
Yep.
But I could try to somehow, keep up with the the young guns. Um, it'd be fun.
Yep. For sure.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think increasingly, the world Othello community is expanding for sure, and I'm sure we would eventually see a lot more promising young players as well. So I think it will
Yeah.
be good fun, given that we have experienced players and we also have young players coming into the scene. So I think yeah, that's basically all the questions that I had for you today, and I really thank you for accepting this invitation. So I think and the audience would find that most of your your insights and responses have been very beneficial to both the audience and also myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I do thank you for
Yep.
the nice, kind words, though.